Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining us today. This is actually the final part of a year-long series that we've had around the future of, and we're grateful to JobsOhio, Ohio's Economic Development Corporation, for their partnership and their participation and helping make this entire series possible. As you can see, this is the future of finance, which we're really excited about because this is an incredibly exciting space. It's something that we all see and we all use when we buy things and sell things in our businesses. So it's something that touches everyone, but it's also exciting just because globally there's so much happening in it. But there's also a number of Ohio people, companies, and ideas that are actively helping build and shape this space. And so we're excited for this conversation and our three leaders that we have brought to you today to hear more from them about what they're doing, what they're seeing around the future of finance. So we'll kind of do a quick intro. I'm Chris Berry. I'm the president of OhioX. We're a statewide tech and innovation focused nonprofit organization. We're working with our great member companies and partners of all shapes and sizes to help build Ohio into a tech hub. And what's fun is that there's so much work going on. So as you can see, that's our mission. But what we do is connect, promote, and advocate. So we connect leaders, companies, and ideas just like this today. And showcase those and promote those same people, companies, and ideas and the work that they're doing, because they're doing the hard work, but we're just trying to help spread the awareness. And we also advocate for tech and innovation with public policy officials at local, state, and federal levels to make sure that tech has a voice, which is incredibly important. You can connect with us and follow along for this series, the videos that we've recorded from these. We have a big on-demand content library that keeps growing. On LinkedIn, it's at OhioX. On Twitter, it's at OhioX.org. And on YouTube, where we'll be posting the recording of this. So we have people watching live. We'll also have people watching after the fact too for our on-demand as we continue to build that library, as I mentioned out. And so if you haven't, check us out there. Today's conversation, as I mentioned, it's the Future of series. And throughout the year, each month, we've taken a look at a different sector or industry. And again, how Ohio people's companies and ideas have been building and are building the future. We've started with healthcare, talked about government, real estate, insurance, education, cities, commerce, sports, travel, agriculture was last month, and this month is finance. And so we're really excited for it. We think this is the perfect topic to end this year-long series on, and we're so grateful that you're tuning in. Throughout the conversation, we'd 100% recommend and encourage you to use the chat function. There's a couple different options. You can do it in the actual chat where others can see. You can send it directly to me, and I'm happy to work it in. It's fun when people are able to kind of showcase and share their thoughts or questions, and we can weave it into the conversation to be sure. So today, the future of finance. We have three leaders, as I mentioned, that are doing different things at different companies and organizations, and we're going to hear from them today. We'll ask them in a moment to do an introduction of each of themselves, where they can share the work they're doing, the perspective they're bringing to the conversation, and a little bit, what we might be able to hearing over the next hour or so. So we have Terry Gore, Senior Director of Financial Services and FinTech at JobsOhio. We have Naveed Iqbal, who's the co-founder and CEO at Dolr, a FinTech startup doing some incredible work here in Columbus. We have Rouse, who's the VP of Product at Upstart. Upstart's one of the most exciting, I think, Ohio tech success stories that we've seen over the past few years, known in Columbus, but for those watching in Cincinnati, Dayton, Cleveland, we also have a lot of people working or listening and watching from outside of the state, I know, for all of our events. Check out Upstart, what Naveed and the team at Dolr are doing, and certainly JobsOhio is at the forefront of all of this. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and what we're going to do is ask each of our participants and commenters today to share a little bit about themselves. So we're going to start with Terry. Terry, again, is at JobsOhio. He's working in this financial services space. Terry, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about yourself, your background, what you're doing today at JobsOhio, and we look forward to the conversation today. So thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for the opportunity, Chris. Appreciate you reaching out. Again, Terry Gore. I serve as the Senior Director of Financial Services and FinTech at JobsOhio. Been in the role for a little over 4 years now. Actually did not come from an economic development background. Spent 7 years prior with BBVA Compass, opened up the Ohio market for their correspondent banking division. The bulk of my career, various sales roles in the Midwest, working very closely with banks and credit unions in particular, core banking software sales, spent time with companies such as Fiserv and First Data. But in my role now here at JobsOhio, I'm leading the economic development growth strategy for the FS sector. And what we're trying to do is really drive new job creation and capital investments into the state. So looking forward to the conversation today.
Great. Thank you so much, Terry, for joining. And I know we'll have a ton to dig into. Next, we're going to go to Naveed, again, co-founder and CEO of Dolr. Naveed's got an incredible story, and I think it's one of those Ohio success stories. And I'm sure you'll share it, Naveed. But you and the team don't have to be doing this in Ohio. And probably 5 or 6 years ago, I'm not sure you would have guessed you would have been here. But thanks for joining us. And if you could share us a bit about yourself and Dolr.
Yeah, thank you. It's Ohio, I think, is the best place, the only place for us to do what we're doing. I don't think we would have had any success or as much success anywhere else. And this is based on actual data that we've looked at. We don't just make it up. So very, very excited about being in Columbus. My favorite thing is that you can talk to anybody in Ohio, right? Like you can probably talk to the governor as well if you write a good email. And they will give you 30 minutes to explain yourself or to sell yourself, right? And that's such a wonderful community thing that we have here that you can't find anybody anywhere else. So, okay, aside from getting excited about Ohio, like Chris said, I'm Naveed Iqbal. I'm a co-founder and CEO at Dolr, and we exist to find people more money for their student loan payments. But beyond that, we're all about uplifting our community, right? Like we think that there's a disconnect between the cost of education and how we reward it as a society. So we are working to uplift our members financially, emotionally, because debt is such a big burden, right? Especially student debt. Other types of debt maybe not the same. And also societally, right? Like you go to school, you expect a return on your investment. How can we move you up to really help you achieve those goals that you're not working on right now because of your student loans? So that was a
great
long pitch.
Yeah, no, thank you, Naveed. That's great. We'll dig in more to be certain. Alex, thanks for joining us, and a little bit about yourself and Upstart, please.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Alex. I'm a VP of product at Upstart. My very quick background is, so I'm actually originally from Columbus. I went to school at Ohio State, got a degree in mechanical engineering, but fell in love with high tech and software. And so headed off to business school, didn't use my mechanical engineering degree. After business school, went to the West Coast, spent some time at Amazon. Really consider that kind of a foundational experience for me. I think about it basically as a 5-year-long boot camp, but I really enjoyed my time there. I learned a lot there. Then started a startup in LA in the movie ticketing space, grew that to 100 people, sort of Series C financing. Over the course of time, figured out the business model wasn't exactly going to work out, and wanted to get back to the Midwest to be closer to family, and had a couple kids living out in LA, and that's pretty tough. So moved back here in 2018, spent a little bit of time at Nationwide and ran part of their innovation organization, where I would start up and spin out new companies, and really loved that work, but really missed the culture of high tech companies. And so I made my way to Upstart, and I've been at Upstart for 2 years now, and I head up the product team there. And just a little bit about Upstart. So Upstart is an AI technology company. We provide a technology for banks to help them originate credit. And our business model is a bit complicated, but it's on one hand, we sell that technology to banks. And so that kind of looks like a B2B SaaS company. And on the other side, we market to consumers who come to our website and fill out an application for a loan and get matched with one of our bank partners. And so we're not just a marketplace in terms of matching demand with supply, but we also provide the real special sauce is the technology that powers that platform. And there's really two things about it that are different than kind of other players in the market. One is the core part of lending is predicting that default risk. So we use more data and better modeling techniques, so AI models, and we can drastically improve the ability to predict whether someone is creditworthy. And when you do that, it means we can grow portfolios for banks and lower their lower interest rates for consumers. And we can also expand access to credit, so we can find people who couldn't get a loan from their local bank. They come to us. We can correctly identify that they're actually a low risk borrower, and we can get them a loan. If you think about loans, like that's mobility, that's access to education. So it's hugely important for those people. So that's sort of one. And then the other piece is we use AI to automate the lending process, which is like, if you've ever gotten a mortgage, you can think about all those documents you have to provide. We use AI to automate a lot of that.
Great. Thanks, Alex. That was great. So excited to dig in. And again, anyone's welcome to send in questions to me or put it in the chat. For those watching on demand, unfortunately, can't go back in time. So thanks for watching that way as well. But to start, Terry, I'd love to go to you with kind of to set the stage, because FinTech is one aspect, but then traditional financial services companies, and Ohio, we have that, our kind of 3 C's, which people like to talk about. If you start in Cleveland, you have groups like Key Bank, and here in town we have Huntington, and certainly JP Morgan Chase with huge operations. Cincinnati has Fifth Third. Could you just kind of talk about and then you mentioned things like credit unions and other financial institutions. Can you just kind of talk about the role in general that this part of the economy plays in Ohio, kind of at a high level of just the jobs and the businesses that exist here and the operations that are occurring?
Yeah, sure. I think you got to start back, really when FinTech really came onto the scene and started impacting the industry. So if you think back to, and this was really after the 2008 financial crisis, we saw FinTechs come on the scene, and it was the mentality, the traditional players, us versus them. So they were the enemy. But fast forward, we now see this transition, this evolution, where now they're looking for strategic partnerships with FinTechs. They're actually engaging in partnerships. They are actually, in even some instances, actually acquiring the FinTech. So that evolution in itself has been a significant change. The other thing that I've seen really just in this 4-year period that I've been in this role is the number of these traditional players who've recognized, okay, this is here to stay, and we need to actually build out internally our own dedicated innovation labs. Not everyone, but many have established their own innovation labs and/or teams just focused on innovation, separate budget line item, just focusing on that. That in itself from 10, 15 years ago is totally different. And then lastly, we're seeing more of those corporates who have those corporate VC units that are helping to source and make investments in these types of technologies. At the end of the day, this is really the future. And to just kind of stick your head in the sand is unrealistic. The bulk of my career, I had opportunity, like I said earlier, to work with community banks. Historically, community banks, they relied solely on their core processor for their innovation needs. And it's basically, they don't have it, you didn't get it. And that has totally changed. So it's been a good thing for the industry. I don't foresee that changing. But yeah, so that's sort of what my experience has been.
Great, thanks, Terry. And Alex and Naveed, something that I know of each of you, and Alex, you mentioned, your experience at a big corporation, a Fortune 100, and Naveed, I know you've spent time as well. But what I found interesting is seeing some of these FinTech companies and people that are working on innovation, both in-house at the big companies that we do have, but then also using the experience at big corporations to kind of springboard into either starting their companies or joining kind of upstarts, no pun intended, Alex. But could you both talk a little bit about that, and Naveed, maybe we'll start with you on kind of the background. And I know you have a PhD in mathematics, like this is your space, but I think of it as, we have all these really big companies, and there's innovation, Terry, as you mentioned, happening in them. And then also people that have taken those experiences and are now starting new businesses by using that experience. So Naveed, if you maybe want to start there, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think that we're finally at a place where there's a really wonderful synergy between the traditional financial institutions and what we consider fintechs. Some people might even argue that the line is starting to blur between the two, right? You have fintechs acquiring banks, bank acquiring fintechs, partnerships all over the place. So it's a very exciting time from that perspective. One thing I think that's important to call out, and why I think that the traditional sort of structure will be around for much longer than people anticipate, is that it's very hard, right? Just like healthcare, just like insurance, like it's very hard to make sure that you do the right thing with people's money. There's a lot of regulation, there's a lot of compliance involved. And so to start and actually be able to execute on a good idea, you need a very deep and fundamental understanding of how that works. Yes, like we might completely like disrupt how the process works, right? But it's very important to understand why it works today. Trust is a big part of it. Like the reason we have the Visas and the MasterCards of the world is trust, right? They sell trust. So I think it's like just having a background and understanding how the beast works, how they do what they do, and why it works so well, right? Like when was the last time you heard Chase go down and you didn't have access to your bank account? Never, right? Like happens. So fantastic neobank chime. This happens quite often, right? And that's okay. Like it's like, I'm not saying one is better than the other, but there's a difference here. And so for me personally, starting at a large financial institution was a great learning experience, both on so I worked in consumer risk. So we're at the cutting edge of fraud, trying to understand how to not lose money. And then I worked in product, which now your whole sort of objective is to make sure that the person using your products has the best experience possible, right? So very different contrast, same company, and the resources to do things is so magnificent, right? It's incredible. There's a lot of innovation that happens in these places. But it's not it's a different brief, right? Like the innovation that you have in Chase, for instance, will be very different than the innovation that we're doing at Dolr. And ultimately, I think it comes down to being resource constrained, right? We have to be a little bit more what's the word, scrappy than they might, but we're still both producing important things that will work together in the future.
Yeah, I can jump in. So for Upstart, a core part of our strategy is to partner with banks. And you look at our competitors, many of them have become banks themselves. And so as we look forward, like, if we think about, what is it, what are we good at? What are the skill sets that we have? We have machine learning scientists, like a very large team of ML scientists, computer science, software engineers. Then we think about like, what does it take to do what we're doing? And then we think about, how are our different banks and financial institutions, how are they going to get that skill set? So you think like there's the big banks out there, and they likely will be able to build these types of skill sets within their companies. But you think about all the other financial institutions, it's very unlikely that they're gonna. If you think about the future of finance, we strongly believe it's going to require these types of skills. It's going to be unlikely that you're going to see the corner bank have a machine learning scientist, on staff. So we think that's where we think we're going to be a partner for banks. They're in the future will be, those institutions relying on different fintech providers to augment the skills and capabilities that they just don't have or can't have in-house.
That's great. Thanks, Alex. And Tara, I'd love to kind of come back to you about, the JobsOhio, because it's the strategy there that you're seeing and you and the organization are working towards in the future, because it is so exciting with, the work that our big financial service companies are doing and startups and just everything in between. So, what are the key pieces as we look, we're literally about to turn the calendars into a new year. But as we look forward into the coming years to come, what are some of those pieces that you're keeping an eye on and that your all's work at JobsOhio are focused on?
Well, first off, it's from a FS sector strategy perspective, it's really targeting those areas where Ohio's value proposition really resonates. First, targeting those operational relocations from higher cost locations of the country, focusing on those fintechs that are scaling, that are looking for cost advantage areas of the country. I think Upstart would fall into that. And then lastly, focusing on those targeted international scale-ups looking to enter the US market. Think of Klarna, for instance, and their move into Central Ohio. So just understanding, hey, the value proposition is going to resonate with some, but not others. You're going to have, and I talk to companies, weather is a big part of their conversation. And at the end of the day, I can't change how Ohio's weather is. But in terms of a good business environment, some of the things that we've shared as a group already today, the collaborative nature, I would say across the state, within the ecosystem. If those are the types of things you're looking for, Ohio makes a lot of sense. And it's not that hard of a decision if you really factor in, I guess, the more important things.
That's great. And I think, Naveed, I see you come on mute, but you might be a perfect person to chime in because you came from Florida and a lot of your co-founders and team members came from Florida. So love to hear your thoughts on that.
Man, I made a long presentation to try to convince these guys to come to Columbus. And I was on the first slide. I said, you have to move to Columbus. They said, okay, let's talk about business. It's like, what do I do with the rest of these slides? But so yeah, we absolutely love it. I think two things that we need to highlight about what Terry was saying here is that access to talent is something we don't speak about enough. Like, we have access to some of the most incredible talent in the country right here. Some of the best universities are within like a stone's throw, right? And these people are actively looking to come back, right? Like Alex has come back. He didn't have to come back. He did a fantastic startup in LA, right? Like, there's opportunities there. But why are we coming back despite these terrible winters? Is that there's so much community and synergy that you can do big things in this part of the country. And I like to, I think it's very important to point to places like Drive, where their entire thesis is based on this. They've got over $1 billion under management that they're deploying, some in the Midwest, across the country, wherever, but it's making a big difference to telling that story, right? Like, one of the biggest challenges with people is telling them, hey, just jump on a plane and get here and see for yourself, right? Like, forget about everything else. Come see what we're doing and you will be very impressed. Because maybe we need to do that better, right? It's like, tell our story better and be a little bit more boastful about it. That's just like, it's a cultural thing maybe, right? Like, so let's see how it changes. I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, so happy to jump in on. So Upstart was founded in the Bay Area by ex-Googlers, and we didn't act. So founded in 2012, we didn't start our Ohio office until 2019, and really that was because we just it was very difficult to compete with the big tech companies in the Bay Area, like compete for talent, and so we looked all across the U.S. For a place to put a second headquarters, and Columbus really came to the top of that list, and it was for a number of factors. Because we're a machine learning company, like, we actually did look at the number of people who had the job titles of software engineering, machine learning scientists in Columbus compared to the number of jobs. And we could see that there was a supply of people here that were the type of people that we were looking for, but also, of course, like the cost of living. The JobsOhio was actually also provided, was a great connection for us. So there were just a number of things about Ohio, in Columbus specifically, that really set it above the other cities that we were looking at. And it's been an incredible success for us. So, started the office in 2019. It's now larger. We're about 1,000 people here now. It's larger than our office in San Francisco. We've been able to hire all kinds of roles, like all of the critical roles that we need. So, software development, machine learning. We have large operations workforce here. So I think from our perspective, Columbus, it could not have worked out better. And it's absolutely love the city.
Yeah, that's great, Alex. And maybe for Alex and Naveed on this one, as a bit of a follow-up to this is, as we kind of, and there's a lot of excitement happening in Ohio. And I think one of the big stories, if you think about tech, and Naveed, earlier you mentioned, things like healthcare is tough, insurance is tough, but that's kind of the pillars of, as Terry and his team know, that's like what Ohio does. That's what our big corporations do. And Columbus is certainly, there's this built up InsurTech hub, which there's a bit of a natural then kind of evolution into a FinTech hub because they are closely related. So curious on, as we think of more true FinTech companies like Upstart, like Dolr and others, what do you think some of those keys are as, again, we turn the calendar into a new year and look at the next really decade of Ohio, that you think maybe there can be a bit of a replication of what's happening in the insurance world, but also, as kind of decentralization occurs and people are across the country, that we can kind of realize this opportunity too.
Naveed, you want to take that one?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of pros that are working in our favor here, right? Like we have access to this talent and to that deep knowledge, right? Like that's critical. Is you can literally call somebody and he will tell you, or she will tell you how they built the 401k process, right? Like you can speak to that person who developed and sold it to the rest of the country. If you're trying to sell a benefit, you can't buy that, right? You can't replicate that anywhere. It's like it has to just come naturally. So that's wonderful. I think a couple of challenges that we have, which I'm very, very like positive about with developments here, is that traditionally the Midwestern investment scene has been not as exciting as our partners on the coasts, right? So you'd see a lot of startups. I know when I started thinking about forming a startup, thinking about getting funding as well, I spoke to a lot of people that say, hey, if you want to get funding, you should leave Columbus, like just go somewhere else, right? I was like, that's BS, right? First of all, but there was some level of truth to it. I was being a bit over optimistic. There is a different sort of approach that we take to startups. However, people have recognized that, right? You're seeing new venture firms pop up every day with different and very meaningful, impactful objectives, right? Like access to capital for anyone, access to startup investing for anyone, right? Like underrepresented founders, like underfunded founders. Like there's a lot of interesting things happening here that are now bringing eyes to us and saying, hey, what are these people doing? How come they have that much deal flow? Like how do we not hear about this? Like why do we not consider them the same way? And one of the most BS things I so much BS. One of the things I hear about that really upsets me, that I don't like, is people, when they talk about Midwestern startups, like to say, oh, we lack urgency. This is one of the most silly things I've ever heard, right? Like we don't lack urgency, we just don't talk about it. You see us working, we work harder than anybody else. Like you want to see things happening, come look at the shop, right? Like you'll see things happening. It's not a matter of urgency, it's a matter of telling our story better. So I think that's definitely one area where we could use some help, and these venture firms are thinking about it the right way. So sort of roundabout, maybe I didn't answer the question, but I think I said some good things.
No, I think things like awareness and that's, I think you talk to anyone that's trying to build or something new, these things take money, and it takes awareness that people don't know you're working on something. That's a really tough place to start. And so, yeah, I appreciate that. Alex, anything on your end?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to add on to that. What I would love to see, like I think we've got the start of this wonderful ecosystem happening in Columbus. Like, I mean, it's been happening over the last several years, but it's really starting to take off, and we're starting to see some success. We're starting to see some exits, and some real dollars flow into the state and into the city. And I would really want to see those dollars just get reinvested back into more startups. Like that, we've got the start of the cycle happening. We've really got to keep it going and get turn one startup into 100 new startups. A handful of those are going to be major successes. Get those to start more startups, and that's how we really get the ecosystem taken off. And we are right there.
Yeah, one thing I like to add, one of the things we also need to continue to work on is from the founders of color, increasing that number, which obviously is going to increase the talent base, a more diverse talent base. So that's some work still to be done. So I'd like to definitely see a lot more of that as we move forward.
Great point, Terry. Thank you. And thank you each of you for that. So we'll kind of move into a bit, less on the necessarily Ohio focus per se, but we'll get into a little bit just kind of the actual FinTech space and what you are seeing. Naveed, I'm gonna start with you, because you and I have had a bunch of conversations, and I know you could talk all day. We only have a little bit more time, so we'll keep it to somewhat of a high level, I guess. But as you look at this space, FinTech, there's so much to it. I mean, literally everything from mobile payments to machine learning for lending, Alex, and helping people repay student loans, what Dolr is doing. What's something that excites you, that you're watching, you're following, and that you're like just focused on, and you just can't learn enough about?
So there are two things. The first is real-time payments, right? Like account to account, business to business, real-time payments. Beyond the traditional rails. I think this is a really, really interesting area, and I think it's really going to change how we do business, right? The 30-day, 60-day, like the reasons that we have some of the processes we do is really tied back to our ability to execute and move money on those things, right? Like, and that's moving, like that's changing. It's cheap. It's not as expensive as one might expect. And so that's one area that I'm extremely interested in learning. Like I follow that very closely. Another one is, I'm sure as everybody else is like the Web3 and DeFi stuff, right? Like I think, let me start by saying that I think there's a lot wrong. There's a lot of stuff that needs to happen. But the primitives, the building blocks of what it's going to take to replace a lot of the problems that we have in our existing financial systems today are being developed, right? And we need more of those kinds of companies to be funded so they can fail but still learn and develop those things that are going to lead to the future of how we operate. Central bank digital currencies, lending, like the payments rail. How do you build a trustless payments rail? Like there's some ideas. It takes a lot of work, right? Like because it's got to be 100%, right? Right now we can be like most of our transactions are going to be okay, right? And the merchant and the consumer trust that. How do we move to a place where all of our transactions are going to be okay? Like very interesting things happening in these areas, and a lot of younger people, right, are into finance, right? You can sit down with an 18-year-old Web3 founder and just be blown away by their knowledge of international finance. They might not feel like that's what they're talking about, but that's what they're talking about, right? They're talking about lending and credit and staking and all these kinds of things, like very sophisticated thought. And I love it, right? Because previously, like the people these are not the people you imagine thinking about these things or speaking about them. It feels inaccessible, but because they have a problem that they're passionate about, they want to see the world change in a way that they built. We're seeing old sort of mentalities change, and younger people are talking about these things in a very interesting, innovative way. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, great answer, Alex.
Yeah, happy to jump in. So I guess two major trends that for us is one, of course, is the application of AI to different categories of lending. So that's what we do, but we're very early in that application. We currently do it for us, personal loans, a pretty small category. We're moving into auto loans. We just announced going into mortgage, small business, and small dollar lending. So the application of that technology to those different lending categories is just going to transform them. It's going to give access to capital to a much larger degree of people. So we think that's one that's, like, of course, huge for us. But coming back to Naveed's point on the crypto side, like, very interesting for us. Like it's further out for us. But if you think about the amount of wealth, the amount of value that has been created in such a short time, and just how early the thinking and regulation is there, and how there's not really the access to monetize those funds. You think about, if you have a large amount of capital, there's banks, they have ways for you to monetize that money, basically through loans. That doesn't really exist yet. So we think that there's just huge potential there, and it's day zero.
Terry, anything to add on your end?
Yeah, actually more of a question. I'm curious to get the team's thoughts as it relates to the role of the central banking system from a validation perspective of leveraging the digital currency. It just seems as though, and my impression is, until that's sort of accepted on that space, that there will always sort of be this lack of validity, lack of security, and just more concern surrounding really using it more than what we obviously see today.
I think that's totally true. I think there needs to be some increase of regulation. I don't exactly know what that looks like, because it's such a different space, and its applications are so interesting. But without that regulation or some sort of vote of confidence from government, something that someone trusts, I think you're right. It will remain in sort of the shadows. But I think that will happen. I think that's just a matter of time till something like that happens to bring that legitimacy. Naveed, I'm sure,
I spoke to a guy who described what he's doing in his life is to change the way we think about ownership, right? Like that's how he described what he's doing. What he's actually doing is working with governments and large institutions to try to figure out how to create the central bank, digital currencies. I think the most interesting thing about that is that, like the way he described it, is that deposits are a liability on somebody's balance sheet, right? On somebody's accounting, they are a liability. How do we change that? Like, I don't actually own anything. As an American today, I might say I own this house, I own this car, whatever. I don't actually own any of it, right? Like, the way it's structured, it belongs to somebody else. So how do we change that so that really we're talking about an ownership structure, a store of value that's separated from the ability to transact safely, right? Like that, what you would want the government to do, maybe to want to control inflation, do the typical things that your monetary and fiscal policies are designed to do. So I think that's a very interesting way to think about it, right? Like in many ways, we already have digital currencies because we buy, like most of us use how much of commerce happens with digital currency, probably like most of it, right? Like, so we're almost there. It's just a changing of the mentality of how we think about, what is ownership, what is a store of value, and then what is the enforcement of rules around these things, right? So fundamentals, again, we have to go back to those building blocks that are going to, enable us to realistically do this at a government standard with the level of regulation that is required to make sure that the people who don't understand, my grandmother doesn't give two anythings, right, about how blockchain works. Right? She wants to swipe her card and she wants to have a good time. Right? She was like, I bought that thing, it's going to be here tomorrow. Enabling that experience, it takes a lot of work to build those primitives that tie up to make that her experience possible today. Right? So I think lots of interesting things to happen.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And we did get a question sent in that I would love to work in, and it's around, do you see the FinTech space becoming crowded with so many options for consumers that it almost becomes too much, I guess, in a sense that can either confuse them on choosing the options? So do you see consolidations happening in the space over the next few years?
I can jump in. I do think, like, I guess my answer is sort of like yes and no. Like I do think there is increased competition. I think that's going to increase as we're seeing more success of FinTech companies. Like the success of those companies is going to bring more investment and more companies into the space. But I think that's good for consumers and good for businesses. So that's just going to bring more ideas and more innovation to the space. And I think there will be a small number of players that become the PayPals of this generation of startups. So I think over time we'll see some, I don't know how many, 1, 2, 5 monster companies emerge out of these new FinTechs. But I think of that as a good thing for consumers generally.
I saw a slide the other day, and the slide title was the unbundling of Uber. Now, if you think about Uber, you don't think about it as something that's being unbundled, right? And I think that's the answer. It's a consequence of innovation. Innovation starts with something that's overly complicated, and I can do one part of it much better than anybody else. And then, the consumer started expecting more, so I start adding more, and then I get too big, and somebody else comes and says, I can do this better. So it's a natural part of how we do things. I don't think it's new or anything will change, right? I highly recommend, if you're interested in reading about these things, there's a person here in Columbus, his name is Webb Smith. He writes a fantastic newsletter called 2 p.m. all about commerce. So if you want to catch up on really what the cutting edge of what's happening, it's produced here in Columbus.
Great. Terry?
No, I was just going to say, I liken it, to, this large number of banks that we had in the U.S. at one time. Got to a point where consolidation, for various reasons, just became a part of the landscape. I see something very similar as it relates to FinTech as this continues to build out and grow. I hate to say it, the strong will survive. There will be mergers because it makes good business sense to do so. And so I sort of liken it to what we've already seen sort of historically.
Great answer. And another question came in, and if no one, has the knowledge to answer, that's totally fine, but I wanted to work it in. Thanks, Matthew, for submitting it. But around and this is, I think, for a lot of our kind of innovations, there's a lot of partnerships with colleges and universities. So the question is, are, Ohio colleges and universities, focused on research in this space, FinTech partnership efforts with companies, like yours or others you're seeing? And part of the, Matthew's questions, are we missing, or are there opportunities here for partnerships, things like research institutions and others? So I don't know if anyone has insight to that. If you don't, that's totally fine, but wanted to work it in if possible.
I can just say for us, coming to Columbus was partly about Ohio State and just the super qualified students that are graduating every year. This is just access to that talent. I think we are yet to fully leverage that. Like we don't yet have formal programs for engaging with Ohio State and getting, internships and sort of a pipeline of people to Upstart. So I do think of that as something we want to invest in and improve in the future. It is definitely part of why we're here.
Yeah. And
I was gonna say from a Jobs Ohio perspective, the companies that I interact with, I haven't come across one that's not looking to sort of build that bridge into the higher ed across the state. Yeah, maybe there's some particular certain institutions, OSU, for instance, that everybody wants to get connected into. But what I've also found is that there could be a speedier success working with some of the more liberal arts private colleges that are pumping out just as good a talent for that particular company's needs than focusing on, say, OSU. So, but yeah, so that's definitely something that's available and I see every day.
And I will add that I know, and I didn't have an opportunity to go, but I saw recently Ohio State had a pretty cool couple-day FinTech conference event. And I think, Naveed, you and I maybe exchanged an email on it. I think Alex, your colleague Grant, I believe, even spoke at it, which was great to see, because I think, we are seeing big companies and universities, et cetera, seeing the opportunities and momentum that more newer companies, at least kind of age-wise, that are coming to town doing this type of stuff. So it is an interesting space for sure. We're starting to kind of come to the conclusion of our conversation today, but wanted to make sure to ask, predictions, what you're seeing, what you're watching, stuff we kind of talked about that's fascinating to you. But as you look at predictions, I think that's a fun way to kind of begin wrapping up this conversation, because we can all see, whether it's you go buy a Tesla with Dogecoin, or, I sure wish we would have had Venmo when, I was in high school or something. It would have made splitting pizzas a lot easier. But, what you're kind of keeping an eye on, and it can be a prediction, it can be just something you're watching. And we'll start with you, Alex.
Sure. Yeah. So if I think about really, for us, it's sort of about AI, and the financial services is such a great place for the application of that technology, because there's so much data. Like if you think about all the data that transactions in your bank account, all the data on your credit report, and I think we have one clear application, it is lending, but I think there's going to be a number of different applications that are related to fintech and financial services. So I think we're very early in seeing the application of AI to financial services.
That's great. And Alex, I wanted to kind of, this is a bit off topic, so we'll go back to Naveed and Terry with that. But for a company that's as big and as growing as Upstart, we were just talking with colleges. What are the skills that you are seeing for the space, the types of, whether it's degrees or kind of roles that maybe you're hiring? And I know every company is different, and also, you have operations in California and Ohio. But as you kind of think for that next, year, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for either college grads or people to kind of look into, maybe reskill or upskill what they're what they've historically studied or trained for. What are you seeing in this space for that?
Sure. Yeah. Probably the top two for us would be a machine learning scientist and in software development, so software development engineer. So we cannot hire enough of those. So I feel like we have basically endless amount of people there, and then other roles would be kind of anything related to building software. So we need people who are designers, UX designers, who are designing the software, the way it looks, the way you use it. We need people, product managers, or people who are trying to figure out the business problems that we're trying to solve with software, and then working with a designer to actually create it and figure out what are we creating and why. Like, why is it good for the customer? Why is it good for the business? So so we're looking for all roles like that.
Great, thanks, Alex. Naveed, kind of back to the prediction, something you're looking forward to, and if you want to weigh in on the kind of the talent side, since you're I think hiring as well.
I think the way we think about identity is going to change drastically in the coming time. I think it's very exciting, and I think that is going to be the impetus for what gets us to the Web3 world that we are dreaming about, right? no good answers just yet, because there's like, as soon as it becomes digital, things get a bit complicated, right? Like, but I think there's very, very exciting innovation happening in this space. How we choose, how we're going to identify ourselves as ourselves in the future is going to be very, very interesting.
Yeah, great, Naveed. Terry?
A prediction I have, I actually think that Ohio is going to be not that far off when we recognize as globally as an insurtech hub. Everything is lining up for that to be the case. I think domestically, obviously, we're on the map, so to speak. But I really, there's going to be an even bigger boom because there's more emphasis on it now. The success of those companies that have already been here. It's appealing. Companies I have an opportunity to talk to, that's one of the reasons why they want to come here, because they've seen that you can be successful. You can get the talent, because talent's always a part of the conversation. And there's an opportunity from a potential partnership perspective, just due to our number of insurance carriers here. So
great. So as we start to wrap up, we're going to go with 3 quick, fun round robin questions. And so the order will be Alex, Naveed, Terry, and we'll do that for each one. So I'll ask the question, go to each of you, go to the question number 2. The answers don't have to necessarily be quick. But the first one is NFTs. We're going to put on our CNBC hat for the moment. You don't have to share if you own one or have bought one or tried to, but is that something that you think will be, a thing in the future, or are some of these, art pieces that are getting sold just kind of part of a massive bubble? So Alex, we'll go for you first.
This is a fun one. So my 2 cents on NFTs is that I mean, it's so bizarre, but that it is the result of having so much capital and really almost nowhere to put it. So you're seeing these kind of weird ideas come up for like how can you use this value that you've accumulated, and so that's, to me, that it is a byproduct of really not really being able to use that for what you would want to use it for.
Great. Naveed?
Hashtag busted ape. Did you hear about this guy who sold his NFT for 1/100th of the price yesterday? Like, he lost a lot of money. But I think it's a very interesting thing, and I do believe that it's going to be one of the core building blocks of the financial system of the future. I mean, the way it come about, I think Alex is completely right. Like, how it is, what led to its existence is probably interesting, but what we can do with it is very, very powerful.
Yeah, great. Terry?
No, I don't have any, and it will be interesting to see how that evolves. So.
To say the least, one of my favorites in that is, like a Darren Ravel on Twitter. He'll like tweet that this NFT was sold for, $250,000, and the first reply will be someone that just takes a screenshot of the NFT and says, "No, I own it now for free." So it's kind of the Wild West, which is, from having it on TV or talking about it like this is kind of fun. So second one, crypto. Is Bitcoin, thoughts on that? And again, you can or cannot if you personally like it, but more of just is digital currency, especially outside the realms of governments like that, is that something that's going to be around, and is that to the moon going to be happening, or is it kind of going to fade over time? So Alex, Naveed, and Terry again.
So I mean, I think the jury is out. I think it does have the possibility of being a world transforming thing. And so, I mean, it solves so many real problems, but like we were talking about before, but it hasn't yet reached that point of being legitimate. So, and I think it is possible that it might never do that, and then it could be kind of this flash in the pan. But my hope is that it is this sort of world changing thing.
Great. Naveed?
I think that I'm want to withhold commentary because I don't know just yet. Like, I think there's a lot of positive things that can come out of it. Mm-hmm. We just don't know enough about it, and it's very expensive. Like, so I'll give you an example. I tried to buy an ENS domain name this morning. The cost was $10. My total cost was $79. So just to participate, it's prohibitive, right? So I don't know. Good things to happen in the future, I'm sure.
Great. Terry?
Yeah, I think it has potential. I think we all agree that there's potential there. It's just a matter of, from my perspective, as I stated earlier, I just think the whole regulatory piece, it's got to bring some sense of credibility to it for it to really truly take off.
Great. That again, another fun one. So thanks for answering that. And that's all that's extremely fun to follow around, and you see these people become multimillionaires overnight from a coin with a dog.
Hey,
logo.
wait until the tax man comes knocking, then we'll see.
Yeah, exactly. Better put some money aside. All right. So final one. We end all of our conversations like this on, but favorite place in Ohio. So, someone's coming into town, college friends, work colleagues, family members, where you have a day, a weekend, where are you taking them? And again, we'll go Alex, Naveed, and Terry.
For me, that's just, it's got to be German Village. I mean, it's just such a unique place here in Columbus. So many cool bars and restaurants. Such a cool look. You think like the cobblestone streets, the brick houses. It's also where I proposed to my wife. So it's got some special sentimental value. But to me, that's the place.
That's a good one. It's also the New York Times favorite place to go when they swing through town. Naveed.
So recently, I love farms, and I would take any of my friends to Young's Dairy Farm. It's just, I think, a fantastic place. That's been my recent favorite.
Which is Dayton area, I believe.
That's right. Yeah.
Dayton area. Terry.
Yeah, well, it's sort of two. Can I give two? So depending on the audience, Easton's a big hit for the shoppers in the family. But if someone just kind of just take half a day, just a really good scenic ride driving down to OU, and particularly during the fall, that's a great campus to kind of hang out on during the fall time of the year.
That's a good answer, Terry. And I'll add a kind of a northeastern route for that is Amish country, which especially as the leaves are changing, it's a great drive and it's a lot of fun to do. And you'll get some good food, to be certain, and pick up some pies for the holidays. So, well, that concludes it. And I appreciate, our three panelists. This has been a ton of fun. Again, the last ones were definitely kind of fun to kind of see. And, there's a lot going on in this whole space and what we can, expect to come. And there's probably going to be more innovation these next 10 years than, in the hundreds of years prior, to be sure. So thank you for sharing your expertise, sharing your work and your insights. And we have to, again, thank JobsOhio for helping make this entire year-long series possible and doing incredible work and all across the state. It's an exciting time to be in Ohio, and the tech part of that is certainly a big part. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate you watching. Again, these will be on demand on our YouTube channel. So very much recommend you go there and check out our other ones from the series. But this has been a lot of fun and the culmination of a year-long project. So thank you for tuning in. We appreciate your time and have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.